everyone. Thank you all for coming once again. My name is Wesley McEwen, but all of you know me. I'm going to go ahead and give my speech, The Ignorance of Bliss. The United States of America harbors one of the most sound and legally solid governmental structures in all of history. However, the freedoms it promotes, the freedoms it promises to protect are slowly being pulled away willingly from the people into the hands of our government. While it may seem that Americans have found it more important to lead an easy lifestyle than to enjoy the freedoms fought for on their behalf, the reality is more complex. What truly appears to be the case is an unpleasant ignorance of the assault of freedom by the very institutions set to protect it. In unearthing the extent of this loss of freedom, the roots can be seen running far deeper into the lives and history of the American people than anyone may have expected. It seems that, in seeking consistency, ease, and comfort, Americans have unknowingly sacrificed their freedom, true identity, and autonomy, and taken on the slavery shackles of systematic lives. From the very education system set in place to raise the future of America to the corporations that provide the vital industry to this great nation, it seems that every step of the way there is an attempt to appease and subdue these citizens into relinquishing their most basic freedoms. The first assault on freedom is education. Breaking up education into two parts is vital to understanding the impacts it has on society, viz., teaching and framework. The educational aspect of public schooling is heavily influenced by the ideals of the American philosopher John Dewey. Dewey preached for an education system that focused on the desires of the student and not the necessities of education. While the philosophies of education find their roots in an American philosopher, the structure of education can be drawn back all the way to the Prussians during the Napoleonic Wars. A Prussian philosopher by the name of Wilhelm von Humboldt began to study what was required of humanity of a nation. He wrote of the importance of Bildung. The word Bildung is of German origin. The European Association for the Education of Adults gives the definition: Bildung is the combination of the education and knowledge necessary to thrive in your society, and the moral and emotional maturity to both be a team player and have personal autonomy. The philosophies posed by Humboldt as they stand pose no issue to the autonomy of the person. Contrarily, these ideas support the individual. In his position, he used his philosophies to recreate the education system to what it now is: mandatory, free, public, paid education for all citizens. While the success of the individual might have been the original intentions of public education, in his absence, it led to the easy malleability of the newly founded system by the Prussian government. After the defeats of the Prussian Empire in the Napoleonic Wars, the desire for a more complacent soldier was forming. The issue was the inability to change the people to become more readily obedient. To solve this, the gaze of the government was turned to the new mass education of youth. Being able to influence the ideas of an entire nation at a fundamental age gave total control to the Prussian government. Brian Hyde of the St. George News claims that, quote, "The Prussian education system sought to take education out of the hands of the family and church with 5 key goals in mind. It was to create obedient workers for the mines, obedient soldiers for the army, well-subordinated civil servants to the government, well-subordinated clerks to the industry, and citizens who thought alike about all major issues." Looking deeper into what each instance of education means and how it affects our country is necessary to understanding the trade of freedom for ease. Public school draws children away from their parents and pushes them towards government institutions. One example of this is in New York, where anyone desiring to homeschool must jump through a series of hoops to be considered legal. The most concerning of these hoops is the approval of the individualized home instruction plan. This is a process that requires the instructing parent to provide the state with a detailed curriculum and material list that must first be approved before any child may be exempt from the public schooling system. This is one example of how the government is forcing itself into, and the mother and father out of, the role of education in a child's life. But there are more factors at play in the environment that children grow up in. One of the most evident of these is the dissolving of the traditional nuclear family. According to Pew Research Institute, the number of children with 2 married parents has decreased from 85% in 1968 to 65% in 2017. This decrease in married couples with children has led to an increased number of children in single-parent or unwed homes. Understandably, following this fall of traditional family structure, Pew also shows the decline from 73% of children living in traditional families in 1960 to a mere 46% in 2013. In this study, we have defined traditional as a child living with two parents married for the first time. The recent public education and the dissolution of family structure is relevant to the sacrifice of liberty in Americans is the lack of effort. While not every American that sends their child to a public institution does not deserve liberty and is lazy, one that fails to examine the school policies and mission statement of that school should expect nothing less than their child to abide by whatever standard is set for him or her at that school. According to the Pew Research Center again, the percentage of Americans who identify as Christian has dropped from roughly 90% in 1972 down to 63% in 2020. Likewise, the percentage of religiously unaffiliated adults has increased from 5 to 25% over that same period. Lacking the ability to measure their morals against Scripture, American adults have strayed farther from truth. According to Medium, divorce rates in non-Christian families are about 50%, in Christian homes about 25%, and in relationships where couples pray together, the rate is a low 0.006%. As for how this relates to losing liberty for comfort, the growing lack of practicing Christians and those practicing religion altogether can lead to a society where no one no longer respects religion. A society that no longer respects religion would ultimately lead to a government that no longer respects the right of freedom of religion. Freedom is like a muscle. If you fail to exercise it, it begins to atrophy. Large corporations also seek control of the consumer as well as control over the consumption of products, raw materials, and labor. From this control, they produce income. But these companies are owned by larger corporations, and those corporations are owned by shareholding groups. And the holding groups are run by boards of businessmen. While the idea of a pyramid is often common, a funnel represents the situation better. Money flows from a wide variety of sources and is condensed as it reaches the mouth. In the United States of America, there are laws prohibiting the formation of monopolies over trade. The Antitrust and Sherman Act are some of the main barriers against this. These laws prohibit companies from merging into one large company and eliminating all competition. While monopolies may seem like the pinnacle of capitalism, they're actually the first step towards totalitarianism. The loophole to these laws is not to merge all companies into one company, but to own major controlling shares in corporations that control these companies. Becoming reliant on just a few large companies is dangerous to the American people, and it is vital to understand that in eliminating opportunities to enact freedom, one sacrifices the freedom itself. Now, this effectively does away with free market capitalism. Starting businesses becomes more difficult as the needs of people are already met by big stores, and innovating a better system would cost too much upfront to be financially sustainable for a business. This creates financial dependency of the American people on these companies, and dependency is far from freedom. But corporations push even further into the American people, seizing their grand stronghold, government. In 2010, the victory of Citizens United over the Federal Election Commission in the Supreme Court allowed for corporations to spend an unlimited amount on the campaigns of candidates of their choice. When the campaign of a public representative is funded in majority by an individual or corporation, the representative then is inevitably submitting to the opinions of that entity. This places the entity in an unelected and unofficial position of power over the American people. To say that all liberty is lost when any large donation is received would be blowing the idea out of proportion. It's merely stating that some magnitude of liberty is lost when taking on ease. Now, a trade-off occurs between government and people who are living under that government. The citizens sacrifice some of their liberties in exchange to receive protections and peace. This style of government works if there is balance. But the style of no government, where all the power is handed right to the people, does not work. In fact, it has already been tried. The communist system relies on all people governing not their own selves, but the effort of the entire society to work for the benefit of the common good. This is the opposite side of the spectrum of control. Yet this style of social governance not only follows the same sacrifice of liberty, but requires the total surrender of freedom. One modern-day example of communism is socialism, and this is prominent in one place, Venezuela. As written by a Venezuelan immigrant, Daniel Di Martino, quote, Many in the media have blamed Venezuela's worsening humanitarian crisis on the corruption, mismanagement, failing oil prices, or U.S. sanctions. Anything but the rise of socialism in what was the wealthiest country in South America. Yet, corruption and mismanagement were the direct result of increased government control of the economy, socialism, and in reality, lower oil prices and U.S. sanctions have done little to do with the crisis. Instead, the mass starvation and exodus faced by Venezuelans are the natural consequence of socialist policies implemented by dictators Hugo Chavez and Nicolas Maduro. There are three main policies implemented by Chavez since 1999 that produce this current crisis: widespread nationalization of private industry, currency, and price controls, and fiscally irresponsible expansion of welfare programs. End quote. This example of socialism should be a smoking gun to deter any American from the desire of Marxist socialist government. The entire premise of socialism and communism is for the individual to sacrifice all liberty for the benefit of an easier life. However, as the example of Venezuela shows, life becomes anything but easy. Now, only seeing the negative in life is detrimental to our collective well-being. It would be of no service for the betterment of society if only the flaws in it were pointed out. When talking about the state of the world, author G.K. Chesterton wrote in his book Orthodoxy, quote, "No one doubts that an ordinary man can get on in this world, but we demand not strength enough to get on with it, but strength enough to get it on. Can he hate it enough to change it, and yet love it enough to see it worth changing?" Prevention and preparation is the key to sustaining liberty. Just as society is conditioning us to willingly sacrifice our liberties, we must train ourselves and the future generations to not become complacent. While it may feel impossible to change the government or to fight against corporations, the impact that the collective people can have is significant. The way in which one stops the attack on liberty is to stop submitting to ease and comfort. Leading independent lives keeps you from falling prey to the systems that desire to control you. The biggest drawback, however, is that it is not easy. The responsibility should fall solely on the parent when it comes to the instruction of children, and the most effective way to ensure the instillment of the parent's values in a child is homeschool. The reality of the world we face is that there will most likely be no massive educational revolution, where the entire country changes, but instead, progress will have to be made at the family level. Raising your own children and teaching them is the first step forward. Because the world will be trying to influence your children every chance that it gets, what you fundamentally instill in your kids will be vital for their intellectual and moral survival. Homeschooling gives one the opportunity to teach youth the absolute truths in life, to hold to concrete values, how to think critically and analyze problems, and also how to be an independent agent. This not only has an impact on your children, but also the adults they grow up to be. The government is shaping the future of your country through the education of its young citizens. Parents should also take advantage of this idea to build a better future. Going hand in hand with homeschooling is building strong family ties. Observing the current social state of America can lead one to see that there's almost a wedge being driven into the traditional style of family. Over time, the percentage of traditional families has declined significantly. This is a massive issue facing society today. The dissolution of the family unit has a significant impact on not only the liberties of citizens, but also the nation itself. Creating a weak family environment leaves people within that environment starved for support. Children grow up with either the lack of a parent or the absence of attention needed to have a positive impact on the child. This causes children to start on a downward spiral in which they rely on other things to cope with their issues, such as addictive substances and crime. This reliance on negative activities often ends with the individual becoming a slave to the substance or being imprisoned, both of which remove the personal liberties of the individual. According to the America First Policy Institute, quote, 70% of juveniles in in-state operated institutions are from single-parent homes. And in a study of 75 juvenile delinquents, 66 experienced fatherlessness, 20% had never lived with a father, and 25% had an alcoholic father. End quote. Forming strong familial bonds is not only beneficial to young children, but also the individuals that they become. God can change the way that parents raise their children. Virtue is encouraged, love and mercy and grace are shown, and a multitude of positive communities are available to further influence the course of the child's life for good. But connecting with God has impacts on a personal level as well. When an individual chooses to follow the Lord, a change is made in their life that expands their liberty deeper than any government could offer. Jesus himself declares the new freedom that is found in himself alone. Freedom from sin is something greater than all liberties one can possess on this earth. While we may find great enjoyment in the many liberties we now possess in this country, many people who found themselves in positions of little to no personal freedom can cling to the Lord Jesus for their hope and freedom. This can be seen clearly in the early years of America with the African slaves. While they may not have possessed many freedoms, many still found relief in the freedom in Christ. Citizens of the United States of America acknowledge that the blessings of freedom that they enjoy come from a power greater than themselves. The founding documents, namely the Declaration of Independence, declare freedom from the oppression of the British Crown given to them and all men by their Creator. Quote, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." End quote. In this excerpt, the Founding Fathers declare not only their separation from Britain, but are also declaring that their rights come straight from God. This was vital to appealing to the independents, because in order to override the king's authority, the gift of liberty had to come from someone greater. This excerpt from the Declaration of Independence also goes on to provide instruction for what needs to happen in case of a chronic government overreach. While before the only defense mentioned against the stripping of rights of the people was preemptive methods, now a worst case scenario option is presented. Those who built this country had faced massive government control, and out of fear of the same eventually happening to the United States, provided opportunities for the American people to reform and rebuild their government back to its original intent. This is one final offer of hope that the American people have. If all else fails and our government slips to the point of no return, we the people may build it up. Personal liberty was one of the core tenets that America was founded on. While all governments may require some sacrifice of liberty, what little was originally offered up was done so in order that our important freedoms may be protected. With an ever-encroaching threat of communism, tyranny, and despotism, it is more vital now than ever to hold fast to freedom. While offering up some ease and comfort of our modern lives today may seem daunting and almost impossible, it is not only important, but necessary for the continuation of the United States of America, as well as for democracies around the world. Finding the balance between submitted control and freedom will always be a fine line to walk. If the government is constantly pulling that balance one way, the people must pull back to keep our nation afloat. The American people must stay diligent in the defense of democracy. Thank you. I'll stand open for some questions. If you have any interest, there are some theses over there, 6 of each of ours, I believe, and that has there's a lot of evidence in mind that honestly I can't present up here just because it would take so long, and a couple more examples, but feel free to go ahead and ask some questions. Mr. Ross.
I'm hearing between you and Gloria both a common theme that we all just need to quit being so stinking lazy. Is that an oversimplification?
I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, not really. And it's not to say that people nowadays are just like couch potatoes, but there's definitely a lot more of them than there were, I mean, even just a couple of years ago. I mean, everything's becoming super easy. You can get a drone to deliver your food, and you never have to leave your house for anything. So this shift is definitely becoming a lot more elevated now. It's almost exponential. And so we're kind of seeing this take off. And I think the older generations will call us out on it a lot. I know my dad will. You know, if he sees you sitting around, he'll let you know. But I think it's something that us kids should see and try and make efforts to combat.
So is it an awareness or a vigilance towards being the shift happening?
Yeah, so the biggest thing about my speech is not to condemn anyone who chooses to just let the government take care of them. They're on, welfare or whatever, but they should be aware that in doing that, they're giving up some of their liberties. I mean, everybody has the right to choose how they live their life, I guess. I mean, to a certain extent, obviously, there are some limitations to that, but you should just be aware that not everything is free.
So you mentioned as part of your speech that the government in America is of the people, for the people, and by the people. And it's put in place by us,
Yeah.
for us. And I see a lot of people in society today pointing the finger, be it at the condition of a road, or the condition of the school system, or the condition of bridges, or the fact that the way to the stoplight. And I don't agree with these conditions. Aren't these our conditions that we have chosen to be? We have this government that is our government, and it's in place. Why do we not take ownership of the fact that the roads are our problem to be tended to by our government? And we can't say, the police, there's no law in Illinois that says we need to have police forces in any town. But we all agree that we should have a police force to protect ourselves in our community. But I don't want that guy to pull me over and to correct me when I'm doing wrong. I want, justice for thee, or justice for thee and grace for me.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we tend to lean? I think the answer is going to be very similar to what Gloria said. Why have we lost our ownership for our own government?
I mean, I think there's a couple of things that go along with that. Obviously, in our system of government, we're not, we call ourselves a democracy, but we're not actually a democracy. We're a constitutional republic, I believe. And so that being said, we don't have direct influence on every single thing that happens. Obviously, you elect representatives, and they kind of make those decisions for you. I think my biggest issue I take is that everybody who wants to become an elected official promises that they're going to have the government do this for the people, and it's going to do this for you, and this for you, and this for you. And they don't really say it's going to take this from you, and we'll give you better roads and better healthcare, but we're going to have to raise taxes to do that. And I also think that there's a lot of government spending, obviously, as we're seeing now, that isn't being disclosed to the people. And we've kind of had some of the wool pulled over our eyes. And there's a lot of behind the scenes doing that is taking place. As for taking responsibility of it, I think it's just easier for people to be ignorant. I mean, ignorance is bliss, right? If you don't know what's happening, and you never want to say that it's your fault, then you're going to have a grand old time.
Thank you.
So, do you, I have a couple questions. The first is, it seems that, would you say that, because capitalism is basically, one of the principles of capitalism is that we are going to act on our own self-interests, right? I mean, that's a principle of capitalism, that I am going to make decisions in the economy according to my self-interest. But would you agree but in order to have a healthy capitalism, what you're saying is that we also need self-restraint?
Yeah, I mean, in anything you do, you need self-restraint. I mean, you could say, man, the soda pop tastes good, but you can't drink a whole bunch of it, otherwise, you end up diabetic and you end up not doing too hot. With capitalism, it's interesting because while it's so beneficial for everybody, it can often be taken advantage of easily. So there are some laws in place that control that, and I feel like once again, we're kind of at that place where we have to weigh, the control over the freedom and what is best for our society. The Sherman Act and the antitrust laws are things that are good for the benefit of the people. And I'm sure if you were a big corporation owner that wanted to take advantage of people, you wouldn't see those laws as being the best things for you. But for the common interest and for everybody else, that is beneficial.
But having laws against, you're not allowed to sell soda, for example, you wouldn't see those as appropriate laws to be made.
Okay, well, I feel like now, why exactly are you saying there should be laws against soda?
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that what I'm saying is that you're saying that, okay, there are places where the self-restraint is important and capitalism can be taken advantage of. And there's places where you need laws so that capitalism isn't taken advantage of.
Yeah.
But there should be actually self-restraint in ourselves and in the government to not enact laws in certain places. For example, to not enact a law that makes it illegal to sell soda.
Mm-hmm. I think that self-restraint is really important, and there are areas where it's lacking because obviously we live in a fallen world where people are going to do what they think is best for themselves, and when they're in positions of influence and power, that can obviously be taken advantage of. And so there are some laws that are necessary for the betterment of people that the people have decided on to keep people in influence and power under check. But also, there are some that are just an overstepping. And so that has to be weighed.
And then my other question is, do you think that there are actually agents in places of power that are trying to use our ignorance against us?
Yeah. So I was listening to Noreen Hammond speak as CEO. Most of you probably know what CEO is. And she was talking about like how bills in the Illinois House kind of pass through. And what they'll do is they'll have the bill titled one thing and have all these points on it, and it'll get approved, and Noreen will put her stamp on it, like, this is amazing. And it goes up, and then they're like, well, we're going to edit the bill a little bit, and they'll totally wipe it and put something brand new on it. And then when it comes back in, because it has to get reapproved once they edit it, and, like Noreen will say, absolutely not, this is not going to fly, because it goes against either her political beliefs, her moral beliefs. Then what the other politicians will do is, since the name of the bill is the same, they'll say, well, she does not support helping special needs kids in schools, when the edited version of the bill is, hey, we're gonna push hormone blockers on special needs children. So there is a little bit of, they're taking advantage of the people who are not interested or who don't know about the resources they have to know more about their government.
And they're actually trying to make it as confusing as possible to understand what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what I think is that some of us may be lazy, but it's also willful obfuscation of everything.
Yeah. And part of that is who you become. And if you're a child who wasn't raised to think things through, and I'm talking about this a little bit more in the educational part, but it's very necessary for children to grow up with the desire to question things and think, why is this in place? Instead of accepting everything at face value, which is kind of the philosophy that Dewey put in there, is that everything needs to just be handed to these children so they don't have to think about anything. And so I feel like some of it is our fault for not wanting to learn, and there's a lot of it that's not our fault, that's just been handed to us that way. And I feel like it is our job to get rid of that ignorance and to shift our nation for the better.
I got a question for you.
Yep.
So you say that homeschooling is the way to go, right? Basically. So what do you do say that happens, what about higher education? Would you be a proponent of that? Or what would you suggest beyond homeschooling, someone wants to go to college or whatever? Just what's your thoughts?
Great question. I feel like if you're raising your children right, and you're teaching them that this is right, this is wrong, even when people in authority may try and push a different narrative on you, stick with what you believe, stick with your religious obligations, your moral obligations, and, try and engage in conversations to figure out where they're coming from. But at the end of the day, you have to have this root. I feel like that's where homeschooling and a super involved parent comes in very critical for, youth going off into the world. Yes.
Kind of to piggyback off of that, you mentioned that a side effect of a lot of these problems is you're seeing single parent homes and homes where children are experiencing like just different structures of families, and there's a wedge being driven into the traditional family structure. Do you think this is a side effect of this institutional schooling system where you have one adult in charge of however many kids and that they're only seeing one figure of authority? Then as they grow up, they're learning that one figure of authority is sufficient?
So I feel like that could be it, but I honestly hadn't really considered that aspect of it. I think the biggest issue that comes about is when there is that one figure of authority, right? And the children are going home and they're not getting a whole lot of attention. And their parents don't really have any issue. And so, if the government wants to come in and change a little bit of the narrative or teach certain things in history and cut out certain things, like in Illinois, they're pushing to pause history for the first semester next year while they rewrite all of our history books to be more inclusive. And then after that, implement new history textbooks, right? So this is where, if you're not aware and you're not invested in your children's education, then this becomes an issue. And I feel like the government has kind of pushed for us to be more, I feel like there's a big push for individuality in a negative way, where you think that you're not reliant or obliged to anyone else, which has led to an increase in single parent homes, more disobedient children who are more rebellious, and end up in areas of crime and reliance.
So how do you teach a good level of individuality if the school system is teaching a negative one?
So the difference between that is being an individual within a society and being an individual in a society of individuals, right? So everybody either has their own bubble or they're all individual people within a bigger bubble, right? And so I feel like if we want to teach people that, or children, I should say, that they're part of a bigger society, they should be firm in what they believe, and that should be the core of their individuality. But they should learn how what they believe affects other people and how other people will interact with their beliefs. And that kind of forms more of a conglomeration where people are more willing to be with one another instead of being super opposed to that.
I have a question about, Gloria covered words being important, and I remember during Barack Obama's presidency, he made a statement that was very profound to me, words being of such great importance, and knowing that 50% of this year's graduating class from Trinity, I believe, is pursuing military service, which is that's a great number.
Better than public school.
But Barack Obama said, you have to listen to this carefully, I think all American children or young adults should be required to volunteer. What's your take on our obligation to serve this great nation, or on what level are we called as citizens to participate? On what level, in your opinion?
Yeah. So if you're requiring everyone to volunteer, it's not volunteering. I mean, nobody calls like the selective service, nobody calls it volunteering. It's called the draft. You get called up and you have to go. I feel that every citizen does have an obligation to their country, but not necessarily every citizen is called to be involved in the police force or the firefighting force or in the reserves or the guard or active duty, Marines and Navy SEALs. But every citizen, it's your civic duty to vote, right? Everybody kind of says that. It's your civic duty to understand who you're voting for. And I feel like one of the biggest issues we run into now is that people don't really care that their civic duty is to know who they're voting for. They just kind of go off of either the biggest buzzwords in politics that are being thrown at them through a screen, or they're just voting based on the color that is associated with their party. So they're kind of kicking the can down the road and shedding their responsibility for their country.
Do you feel that greater service, i.e. military service, is encouraged?
I feel like it should be encouraged, but everyone obviously should have the freedom to not do that. I feel like as soon as you start imposing these things on people just because you can and you feel like it, I feel like it's very different than the necessity of a draft. Obviously, that's when we're in war. And I mean, you kind of think of the Vietnam War, where some people think we should have been there and some people think we shouldn't have been there. And the American people, those who weren't overseas, were expressing their opinion. And, you know, while some people may disagree with them, that is part of their civic duty to make their voice heard as individuals and to be informed. But being called into service can offer you a different perspective that is very beneficial, I feel. I got a thumbs up from the administrator.